Hello, everyone. My name is Dova Levin. I'm the National Senior Director at MGFA. We have a research webinar today called Expand-D Study from Alexion. I'd like to introduce the speaker. Well, we're going to have introductions in a moment, but Dr. Ralph Vander Valk is the Senior Medical Director at Alexion and the Global Clinic Lead for Alexion 250 MG program. I just want to thank our sponsors today, our national presenting sponsors, Alexion, argenx, and UCB, and our national sponsors, Horizon and Janssen Neuroscience. I am going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to turn it over to Caitlin McCarrick, who's the patient advocacy lead at Alexion, for introductions.
Thanks so much, Dova. I'm going to pull up slides here. Oh, it looks like, Dova, you might have to enable the screen sharing on my end. Let's try this again. Perfect. So thanks so much, Dova. Ralph and I are thrilled to be here. As Dova mentioned, my name is Caitlin McCarrick. I've been with Alexion for a little over 3 years, and as Dova mentioned, I'm a patient advocacy lead with Alexion. So before I hand it over to Ralph to talk a little bit about the specifics of the Expand study, I wanted to just give a bit of an overview about who we are as Alexion and what inspires us and what our mission is. And so, you know, Alexion has been in the rare disease space for over 25 years, and even there's been some growth than what you see here on the slide. So we have 5 approved therapies across 7 rare diseases. We're in over 50 countries now, and we have close to now 4,000 employees around the globe. So tremendous growth for, you know, exclusively dedicated to you know, innovating and developing therapies and medicines in the rare disease space, and bring a lot of knowledge and energy and excitement to be here with you all today. And, you know, when we think about why we do what we do from an Alexion standpoint, it truly is for you all and for patients, and patient centricity is something that's really important to us, and is more than just a catchphrase. It's really in our DNA, and the way that we're able to do that is through listening and understanding and partnering with MGFA and other groups of the like, and spending time with folks in the community, much like we're doing today, listening to what you all need and the moments that matter to you in your journey with your rare disease, or walking alongside a loved one who has one as well. And so before I turn it over to Ralph, really just want to reinforce the commitment that we have to innovation and to clinical development and to research, to make sure that what we're doing is meeting the needs that you all have in your journey and in your experience. And so we'll talk a little bit about the details and the specifics around the Expand study and the clinical trial, and I'll turn it over to Ralph to do that.
Thank you, Caitlin, for this good overview from Alexion, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the US. I have been recently visiting the US, and I didn't realize it's such a large country, so I know that people are in different time zones. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I would actually like to start with a personal anecdote before we really go into the matter of today. So you might have read in my profile that I'm by training a respiratory expert, and recently moved to neurology, and that was really for a personal reason. So I have a rather small family, but all my family members on my maternal side are suffering from neurological disease. So I know firsthand how important it is to develop new medicines, and also with my family members, I'm experiencing how it is to be participating in trials. So actually, one of my goals here today is really to learn from you how it is to be in a trial, if you have been in one, if you're considering to be in a trial, how does a good trial look like for you, and what can we improve, what we shouldn't do. All these kind of things are really exciting for me, because I really hope to make all the clinical studies that I'm responsible for, that they are as patient-friendly as possible. So this slide, probably you guys all on the line know much more about this than I do. You're living with the disease, but I'm also realizing that we maybe have some people on the line that have just recently been diagnosed with GMG. generalized myasthenia gravis. So it's a rare disease. So it's one of the reasons why we don't have so many medications yet. We're really accelerating in terms of medications now that are available, but it also depends a lot of where you are in the world, what kind of medicines you have access to. So it's a rare, it's also an autoimmune disease, and it's involving multiple muscle groups. And if you really want to understand what is actually happening, is that there is not so good communication between the nerves and the muscles. That communication is impaired, and that's resulting in that muscle weakness that you're experiencing every day. So really the two main symptoms of patients with generalized myasthenia gravis are muscle weakness and fatigue. So these are very important aspects that we're also trying to measure in our trials to test if these experimental treatments are working. So if you move to the next slide, Caitlin, please. So the study is called EXPAND. Dove already mentioned in the introduction that the medicine that is under investigation is called Alexion 2050. What I think is quite important for the patient, and hopefully this is really something convenient for you, which we're also testing, is that 2050, the medication that we're testing in the EXPAND study is an oral treatment. So it will be administered twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. What I think is quite important when you would consider to be a participant in the EXPAND study is that you would know when you would get the active experimental treatment. So the duration of when you could potentially be on placebo is relatively short. That's only 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks, patients or participants, I have to say, of course, will get the active treatment. And I will, on the next slide, explain a little bit better how that procedure exactly works. So during the study, the patients or the participants are meant to be on the same background medication as prior to starting in the study. And of course, there are exceptions that you can discuss with your physician when it's needed to escalate or maybe even de-escalate when you're a little bit further in the study of your current background medication. And of course, with all clinical trials, we of course hope that the medicines are effective, that they would reduce your symptoms or maybe even potentially modify your disease, or maybe the end goal, cure the disease. It's equally important that we, of course, also monitor the safety and the tolerability of the investigational medication. And that's, of course, something we would take very serious with the EXPAND study as well. So if we move to the next slide, Caitlin, we will discuss a little bit with everyone how the study is actually being run. It's pretty straightforward, I would say. I think it's fair to say that you can segue the study in 4 distinct periods. So let us start on the left of the slide, and then slowly we talk over the 4 pillars that we're seeing here on the slide. So there's a screening period. This is probably for the participants a very exciting period, because that is where the doctor is going to test all kinds of things to see if you're truly eligible to participate in the study. And with participation, I mean that you get randomized. So you get either the placebo or the experimental drug, which is of course very important, because we want to make sure that absolutely the right patient, which we would expect a priori, so from the beginning, would respond mostly to the experimental treatment. So that's happening in that screening period, which would take approximately 4 weeks. So once the physician confirms that you could be randomized, so could be exposed potentially to the treatment or the placebo, we go to what we call the primary evaluation period. So it's very important to understand then what kind of treatment you can get. You can get the active treatment, for which we actually have a high dose and a low dose, or you could get placebo. But it's not an equal distribution of what you could be allocated to. So there are basically 5 options. 2 options goes to the highest dose, 1 option goes to the low dose, and 2 options go again against the placebo dose. So you have a 60% chance in that primary evaluation period that you would be exposed to the experimental drug. So what is also, of course, important is how long that primary evaluation period is. And that is 8 weeks. That sounds sometimes long when you have a lot of symptoms, but if you compare that with other clinical trials, that's a relatively short duration. And I've worked very closely with my statistician to still be able to measure if the drug is working in that treatment period of 8 weeks. So the statisticians are the people that run the numbers within Alexion, AstraZeneca, so that we can see if the drug is working or not. So what is important? So you finish the primary evaluation. Again, this is 8 weeks. Then we would transition to what we call the extended treatment period. And from that moment on, everyone will be on active treatment. So those 40% of patients that were previously in the primary evaluation period on placebo, they will then get the active treatment as well. They get a 50% chance to get the high dose and a 50% chance to get the low dose. So everyone from 8 weeks until 26 weeks will be on active treatment. And that's not always the case in all the other different trials. So that could be maybe one of the appealing aspects of this trial. So you heard me saying a few times that we have a high and a low dose. It's important that we test, of course, both. And we will run analysis at some point in time where we would determine if the low dose or the high dose is the right dose for pursuing with the study. And that moment, when we know what the right dose is, we would move into the fourth period, which we call the open label extension, because then you would know, of course, which treatment you exactly get, and you will be switched to the optimal dose. So that could be, again, be the lowest or the highest. So if you're on the high, you go to the low. If you're on the low, you go to the high in the open label extension period. So let us move on to the next slide. So, you know, if you have already participated in a clinical trial earlier, that we have a lot of in and exclusion criteria. So criteria that makes you go into the study, but also there are a lot of criteria where you can unfortunately not participate into the study. And what you see here on the slide is very general. We choose to keep it quite high level so that we can start having a conversation. But of course, if we would list here all the different criteria, the slide would be very busy. So what I would recommend, if you would be interested to participate in the study, consult with your local doctor who's participating in the EXPAND study, and he will know exactly whether you would be eligible for the study or not. But let's go through it briefly. So unfortunately, or maybe I don't have to say unfortunately, because fortunately, there are not a lot of patients with generalized myasthenia gravis below the age of 18 years. But for this study, you need to be above that age cut to allow you to participate in the study. I think it's quite obvious you also need to have a confirmed diagnosis of generalized myasthenia gravis, because of course, if you don't have the diagnosis, this is a potential medication for generalized myasthenia, then we would not expose you to the drug. So that needs to be well established by your doctor. What is also important is that you're considered to be a stable patient. Of course, I know that if you have all these severe symptoms, you don't feel stable. But if it's not going too much up, you not have been in a crisis recently, and your doctor has put you for a reasonable amount of time on a stable dose of medication that are already there available in the place where you live, then you could be considered as well for this study. So again, if you are interested, I suggest that you would start a dialogue with your local investigator. If we then move to the I think it's the last slide, Caitlin. Yes, but actually a very important slide. This slide is also very close to my heart. And again, I would like to start actually here with an anecdote. So as I shared in the beginning, I have family members with devastating neurological disease. In fact, my uncle has MSA type C. If you have heard about it, it's absolutely horrible. And he is very eager to participate into a clinical trial. You might have also heard from my accent that I'm not an American. In fact, I don't mind to share with you, I'm from the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is a small country. And unfortunately, a lot of pharmaceutical companies choose not to go to the Netherlands because it's so small. They rather go to a big country where there are a lot of patients, where they know that the drug probably comes to the market for commercialization at some point in time. So not always clinical trials are run in the Netherlands. And why do I say that? Because diversity is so important. We want to know if the drug is working from an efficacious perspective in the patient, but also from a safety perspective. And we know we're not all the same. So that is one thing why it's important. But also for people like my uncle that are very eager to participate in a trial, they don't have the opportunity. Well, MSA is even a more rare disease compared to GMG. So for him, if he could be in a trial, that would be very, very important. So we're trying to investigate now if we can get them into a trial in a neighboring country which is Germany, which obviously is a big country and is running trials for this devastating disease. So what do I do? You probably ask. So for this study, we have looked at important sites so that there's a good spread over the US in particular. So hopefully most of you will not have a long travel distance to the site so that we can really include all the different patients into the clinical trial. And that also, of course, we have consulted with all the local investigators there to truly see if the population of the US and that everyone gets the opportunity to participate into the EXPAND study. And I will not stop there. You probably would imagine that I'm also setting up new studies, so also for future studies. I really would like to focus that everyone can participate that wants to participate into these studies. And I think it's also needless to say that this is not only me that wants to achieve this clinical trial diversity, it's also my colleagues, and it's one of the most important factors when we decide to run a clinical trial that we make sure to make sure that it's inclusive. I think that's a pretty nice note to stop on, Caitlin. But again, thank you very much for listening to the presentation of the EXPAND study. And really, I hope for the future we can work together and make the trials more patient-friendly. Thank you.
Thanks all. Dova, we'll turn it back over to you to help us with